Let me congratulate you on reaching a very, very important milestone in this specific course. Whatever we have been learning until now is what is called Spring Core. All the features we were looking at, IOC container, dependency injection, auto wiring, these are all the fundamental building blocks whenever you would want to build great web applications or create a REST API or implement authentication and authorization or talk to a database or integrate with other systems, or you'd want to write great unit tests. All the concepts that you have learned until now will be really, really useful irrespective of what application you're going to build in the future. Let's now get a big picture of Spring. Let's try and understand a little bit more about Spring Framework, Spring Modules, and Spring Projects. Spring Framework contains a number of Spring modules. The fundamental features of the Spring Framework are part of a module called the core. IOC container, dependency injection, auto wiring. These are some of the features that are provided by the core module. If you want to build a web application or a REST API, you can make use of Spring MVC. If you want to build a reactive application, you can make use of a module like Spring Web Flux. If you want to access data from a database, you can make use of Spring JDBC. If you want to integrate with other applications, you can make use of Spring JMS. And if you want to write unit tests, you can make use of the Spring Test module. So what we are talking about is the fact that Spring Framework contains a number of different modules. Depending on the type of application you're going to build, you can make use of any of these Spring modules. Now, the question is, why is Spring Framework divided into modules? One of the most important reasons Spring Framework is popular is because it offers you flexibility. Different applications have different needs, and different applications want to make use of different modules. Let's say I'm building a web application which talks to a database. I can make use of Spring MVC, I can make use of Spring JDBC, and I can make use of Spring Core. I don't need to worry about rest of the modules in here. An application does not need to make use of everything that is present in the Spring Framework. They can pick and choose what they want to use. Now, from Spring modules, let's move on to Spring projects. Application architectures evolve continuously. In the last 20 years, we moved from web applications to REST API to microservices to cloud, and we don't even know what's next. And Spring remains one of the most popular frameworks even today. Why? Because Spring continues to evolve. Spring evolves through Spring projects. The first Spring project is Spring Framework. That's what we have been talking about until now. However, Spring did not stop with Spring Framework. They continued creating a number of other Spring projects. Spring Security. If you want to add security to your web application or REST API, if you want to add authentication and authorization for your microservice, that's when you would go with Spring Security. If you want to integrate with multiple databases the same way, then you would go with Spring Data. Earlier, relational databases were very, very popular. And these days, NoSQL databases are very, very popular. Spring Data provides one way to integrate with NoSQL and relational databases as well. So as NoSQL databases started getting popular, Spring came up with this project called Spring Data. And now Spring Data is really, really popular, whether you'd want to connect to a NoSQL database or a relational database. Spring integration. Most applications talk to other applications. So you have a lot of integration related challenges that these applications face. Spring integration is a Spring project which helps you with integrating with other applications. Over a period of time, microservices architectures became really, really popular. You wanted to be able to build microservices really, really quickly. And that's where a new Spring project called Spring Boot was introduced. Spring Boot today is the #1 framework to build microservices. And over a period of time, we evolved to the cloud. And if you want to build Spring native applications, you can make use of a Spring project called Spring Cloud. So as you can see in here, architectures have continuously evolved, and Spring continues to evolve through a variety of Spring projects. So until now, we looked at this specific hierarchy. You have Spring projects, under which Spring Framework is the first project, and Spring Framework has a number of modules: core, test, MVC, and JDBC. And there are a number of other Spring projects as well: Spring Boot, Spring Cloud, Spring Data, Spring Security. Now, the important question is, why is Spring ecosystem so popular? I started making use of Spring Framework 20 years back, and in these 20 years, Spring and Spring Boot and Spring related frameworks remain the number one frameworks of choice to build a lot of enterprise applications. How is that possible? The number one thing that Spring enables is loose coupling. Spring manages creation and wiring of beans and dependencies. It makes it really, really easy to build loosely coupled, maintainable applications. It also makes writing unit tests really, really easy. Number two is reduced boilerplate code. Spring helps you to focus on business logic. You don't need to write exception handling in each method. All the checked exceptions are converted to runtime or unchecked exceptions. A good example is how much code is involved in talking to a database earlier versus now. When I started my career, if I needed to execute a simple query on the database, I needed to write about 50 to 60 lines of code. And today, with the evolution of Spring Framework, Spring JDBC, and JPA, I can do the same functionality with 5 lines of code. Next, architecture flexibility. We talked about the fact that Spring is divided into a number of modules, and there are a number of separate projects as well. So you, as a developer, as an architect, you can pick and choose which modules, which projects you would want to use. You don't need to use all of them. And the last important factor is evolution with time. We saw that Spring Framework was the first project, but over a period of time, there are a number of projects which were introduced. As architectures evolved and as applications started to have new needs, Spring ecosystem also evolved with it. There are a number of new projects which were introduced, like Spring Security, Spring Data, Spring Boot, and Spring Cloud, which help Spring ecosystem to remain popular even today. I'm sure you had a great time in this specific module learning all the fundamentals of Spring Framework. Now that you are familiar with Spring Framework and you have a big picture overview of the Spring Framework as well, in the next sections, we will get started with building a number of fun applications. Let me congratulate you again on reaching this very, very important milestone. You now have a very, very good understanding of the Spring Framework, and you also have a good big picture knowledge around the Spring ecosystem. In the next sections, we will build on top of this knowledge. We will build a number of applications making use of the knowledge you have gained in this specific section. I'm really, really excited to help you build a number of other applications, and I'll see you in the next section.